Hello, y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Jamie. And Jamie, I'm gonna let you say your last name because I think it is super cool, and I think you deserve to own that more than me. What's your last name?
Well, my last name is Jamie MoCrazy. And speaking of that, it actually was a childhood nickname. So it was a nickname my whole life because my birth last name was Crane Mosey. And the Mosey was French and mispronounced a lot. And I was a little bit crazy and very competitive and good at everything I did as a kid. And so my mom, when I was literally under a year old, started calling me her little Mo Crazy, which is a combination of Crane Mosey. And then it stuck. And then when I became a professional skier, which we're going to get to, and was traveling the world and competing at X Games and one of the best in the world, the announcers would say, Jamie Crane Mosey, the Mo Crazy is now on course. And then I had a very traumatic accident and rebuilt my identity in a Mo Crazy fashion and would go by Jamie Mo Crazy for all my speaking events. And then in May of 2022, I got married atop the mountain that almost took my life. I married the love of my life and I legally changed my last name to Mo Crazy. So now that is the name on my passport.
That's cool. So I think, all transparency here, guys. I got to meet Jamie. What was it, about a month ago, something like that, and we chatted a bit, and we connected because we both had traumatic brain injuries, and that was what we're like. Not a lot of people have thing in common, and so it was really cool to kind of meet her and talk to her about that. But her story is very different than mine. So, Jamie, you're a professional speaker, Miss Mo Crazy. What do you speak on today? Who do you speak to? And then we'll kind of work our way back from there.
I became a speaker because of my lived experience. So that's where we should start. So my lived experiences is I mentioned I was a professional slope style, which is you go down the slope and you do flips and spins and you slide rails and you're judged on your overall impression. When I was competing, it was an X Games sport. We were not in the Olympics. We are now, but we weren't then. And then half pipe skiing, which is where you go down a tube of snow and you do tricks on either side and you go all the way down. And again, that was not Olympic sport when I was competing. It was an X Games sport. So I competed in X Games and I traveled the world tour. And I was actually competing at the world tour finals in Whistler, Canada, which is an amazing mountain. Love that place. And on my first run, I ended up in fourth place. And as a very competitive person, fourth place is the first last place. You don't remember the person who's the first person off the podium. You never get that recognition. And I had been ranked first or second overall in the world for 3 consecutive years. And so fourth place didn't cut it. So I changed my run and I upgraded my off-axis backflip to an off-axis double backflip. And on that trick, I actually landed on my feet, but I under rotated slightly and I caught an edge and I whiplashed my head onto the snow in such a way that my brain started bleeding in 8 spots. And I hurt my right brainstem, which paralyzed the right side of my body. At the time of my accident, we were still kind of under the belief that if you had brainstem damage, you would never heal from your brainstem damage. And the statistics for my recovery were in the single digits. They actually wrote my fatality report when I was airlifted to the hospital from Whistler to the hospital because my statistics of recovery were so low. And so not only did they not believe that I would live, they definitely did not believe that I would be able to have this conversation with you right now. So as soon as I got past the visible stages of recovery, because I had to relearn all my basic gross motor skills. So I had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, how to swallow water. Something that's interesting is I basically went through my childhood again. So I was a baby and I had to grow up again. But the difference was babies can nurse. They can swallow things. But because I had feeding tube for so long, I actually, when my feeding tube was taken out, it took me multiple weeks to relearn how to swallow liquids. And I couldn't just start with milk. I had to start with thick liquids before I could get down to swallowing a glass of water. And you just take that for granted. You're like, you know what? Like, as soon as you reach a couple years old, you can swallow a glass of water and you can swallow a glass of water up until the end of your life in most
Mm.
situations. And so because I had that visible challenges and because I had in the little world of skiing been a known figure and I had a platform, once I overcame those visible challenges, people wanted to hear how I did it. And my mom actually, at the time of my accident, had a master's in psychology and had studied early childhood brain development. And
Mm.
so she was a very, very, very active caregiver in my brain redevelopment stages. And she did things in collaboration with the doctors from my feeding tube in the coma. She was making active decisions that impacted my recovery. So people wanted to hear about that. And so that kind of is what grew our foundation, which is now a certified 501c3. Took time to get there, but it developed that. And it also developed my professional speaking career because people would contact me and be like, so we want to hear about your story and we want to hear what happened. And when they first started contacting me, I was still heavily healing and I could not articulate words and I didn't have the memory that I do now. And I was not the same person as I am now. But those multiple years of recovery and building my career and all of that was the invisible challenges that I face. So now I talk about to a broad variety of people. I go corporate keynote speaking, which tends to want that pizzazz and heroic story of how I was one of the best in the world, had an unexpected trauma that slid me down the mountain of life. I was stuck at the bottom and I made the decisions to climb an alternative peak. So they want to hear that story because every organization encounters struggles as they're being built. And even once they are built, and if you respond to the struggles, you can build a new identity. But if you don't respond to the struggles and you just think that you are successful, so you'll stay successful, you might turn into Blockbuster or some of the other organizations that have really struggled because they haven't changed as time has evolved. So I speak on resilience and change, unexpected change in resilience and how to rebuild your identity. And then in the schools and nonprofit sector, I tend to tie a little bit more in depth into the attributes of brain injury and specifically how to recover from a brain injury and rebuild your identity after a brain injury. Because
I love
actually,
that.
5 million individuals. This was a statistic by the CDC in 2023. 5 million individuals were hospitalized in the US because of traumatic brain injury. So it's actually a pretty big invisible problem that there's
Yeah,
no talk about.
yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to dive into kind of more about the individual impacts of your TBI because I had some effects and I want to see if you had them in common. How did you said you forgot how to walk, talk, and swallow, which was interesting. Did you forget how to understand time?
Did I forget how to understand time? That's an interesting question. I mean, at the very beginning, when I woke up from the coma, that meant I could open my eyes on command. I had serious amnesia, which means absolutely no memory. So I didn't know who anyone was. I
Hmm.
kind of knew that my family was important, but even my youngest sibling, I thought that they were like 10 years younger. And my family would say, that's Jilly. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not Jilly. Jilly's way younger than that person. So I didn't really understand anything. And I'm not sure at that time if I understood time or not, because I just didn't really understand anything. But I would say I have actually never really thought about that specifically if I understood time. I did have challenges with the fact that when I started my freestyle career, I was a ski racer and a gymnast, and I combined the two. And the first day I was on the water ramps, which is when you slide down plastic and flip into a pool, I learned how to do a front flip. The third day, I learned how to do a back flip. And the fifth day, I was recruited to stay living at the Olympic Training Center and join the US team. So I had a lot of trouble with how long it took to do everything. that's something that, so I'm not sure if that's like directly connected to the brain injury,
Hmm.
but I did think that everything took a really long time to get done.
Hmm. So you're not the only person that I've met that has actually had that kind of thing happen. Not the TBI, but the other woman I'm referring to. She had a stroke, and it made it so she forgot who her family was, and by definition needed to, like, she didn't understand what it meant to be a brother. What did it mean to have a father? What does that imply? Does that, I forgot they raised me for, in her case it was like 32 years, and forgetting all these things. So how did you go about rebuilding the relationships in your life without directly remembering who they were? Because I had something similar happen, so I'm curious to see, what did you do?
Well, it's very interesting because what I did was, starting in the hospital, I started listening to lots of music that
Hmm.
I listened to prior to my brain injury. So it wasn't all just classical. I had some like Tupac, in the playlist, and
Sure.
I would have memories come back. So I would
uh,
say, "Oh, the videos are playing. The videos are playing." And I'd have these memories come back. So while I didn't know my family, the more I heard stories about them, I would remember the stories. And then there were situations where I just know things, like now. Everybody always asks me questions about the about 2 months of my life that I have no memory of, that completely changed my life. And everything that I say about that is not actually memories that I remember, it's stories that I've been told. But I
hmm.
do have memories that came back about my family. Same thing with my friends. Like, I had pictures all over my hospital room
Hmm.
about some of my really good friends. And they would explain stories of like how the pictures were taken and all these things. And when they started talking about that, and they had to do it a couple of repetitive times for the first couple days, I didn't really understand, but then the memories came back. So now, like, I do have memories of my childhood, and I do have memories of my family that are my own memories. And then, like most everyone does with their childhood, a lot of your memories of your childhood are stories that have been told. And
Hmm.
that's how it is. I kind of had like a re like I said, re childhood again. So for some of the stories around my brain injury time, some of them are my own memories, and some of them are just stories that have been told so many times that they feel kind of like memories, but I know they're not actually my own personal memories.
Hmm. That's interesting. Now, I know a lot of times when I speak, it's about adapting to change through perspective hacking, which comes from what I learned from the TBI. I want to ask for you, because I'm curious to see if you kind of empathize with this as well. Like, objectively, learning how to walk again and talk again, and all the physical injuries. I'm sure you had some, physical injuries as well. If that were to happen to you right now, but you forget, like, you remember all your past, nobody would want that, right? It would be, say, no, no, thank you, I'll pass. I don't want to have to learn how to walk again. I did that a few years ago. I'm all good, right? I have other more important stuff to do. But when you forget everything, like you and I both did, of course, the memories did come back after time for both of us. How how did you see what was happening to you in the moment? Like, for me, I just thought, oh, I'm in a hotel. I have someone to always be with me, keep me company, aka the nurses. I have people bringing me back breakfast in bed every day. I don't have to do anything. It's amazing. That's kind of how it was for me, right? So for you, kind of what context did you apply to the situation you were going through after you had, temporarily lost access to all of your memories and all the context that you would normally have to judge the experience you're going through, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because for me, similar to you, I thought it was great. However, I thought I was in a movie about a hospital, and I would explain that old people and sick people go to hospitals. I had pictures all over my wall. I had a hammock in my room. My mom was staying with me. in the room, like she was sleeping there every night in a bed. And I was like, this is not a hospital. Like, this is
Yeah.
definitely a movie about a hospital. And I actually went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. So I had this like infatuation of films telling stories and stuff. And so I literally believed that I was in a movie about a hospital. And I thought it was great. And my sister would bring in my food, and so I didn't actually eat any of the hospital food. I had my own meals, and I thought it was fantastic. When it shifted was when I left the hospital. I began to realize I had been in a hospital, and I began to realize that I had this accident. Only I equivalated the brain injury with a torn ACL, which I had done
Yeah.
before. It was
Mm.
kind of like what helped with my recovery was because I had been an athlete my whole life. I wasn't really blown away with the fact that I couldn't walk and I had to relearn how to walk. I was like, okay, I can't really walk upstairs. Been there before, done that before. So what do I need to do? I need to set goals. And my goal was to rebuild my life and return to skiing. So how do I attain those goals? I set attainable goals. So at the time that I had that goal, I couldn't walk up the stairs, and I had a gait belt, which is a human's leash. And what I did was I practiced walking up the stairs over and over on repetition, and my mom and my sister would help me with that. So by the time I left the hospital, I could run up 12 flights of stairs in 3 minutes and 26 seconds because I put the effort into accomplishing those goals. And throughout this whole process, one of the biggest things was my mindset. I knew that I could accomplish the recovery that I wanted to have. So instead of just using my brain injury as something that I victimized myself with, and I was like, well, I can't do this, can't do this, can't do this because of my brain injury. I already had the understanding that there are individuals whose lives permanently change in their ability level. Like, I didn't know what I would go back to be. I didn't know if my right side would work again. However, I knew Paralympians and I knew people whose lives like visibly physically changed, and they still built a life that they loved, and they took everything about them and thought about it rationally and built lives that they wanted to be living, which is something that
Mm.
we are really passionate about with our foundation, is that anybody who had a brain injury can build a life that they want to be living, even if they have changes that are permanent. So even if you do have a lot of memory issues, then write on your phone, give yourself reminders, set emails, like, just there's ways that you can get past these struggles that you face because of your brain injury to build a life that you want to be living. Like, there are ways
Mm.
that every organization can get past the struggles that they face if they think about it creatively and think about it with the knowledge that they are and the belief that they are going to get past the struggle. They have to just figure out how they're going to do it.
Hmm. Now, I'm curious what you think about this as well, because I think for me it was similar. I just thought I was on like a 3-day vacation. There's always a break from school, whatever. And because I had forgotten everything like you had, there was nothing for me to compare it to. And I thought, oh my God, his brain injury is so awful. I don't know how to walk. I don't know how to talk. It was, oh no, I'll deal with this. I'll figure it out. And then I'll get back to school and keep doing what I was doing. In my case, I was still in high school, right? So do you think the losing the memory or losing the access to your memory, similar to what happened to myself as well, actually benefited you in a kind of a twisted way?
Um, I think there's both sides of that. So I think at the
Uh,
beginning, it definitely benefited me with the fact that I just listened to my mom. She had a lot of educated guidance that she implemented in my recovery, which really changed the outcomes. But I like I mentioned, equivalented it to a torn ACL. And so then when the challenges started in the depression side of things was when I realized that it wasn't a torn ACL, and that I had had 8 spots of bleeding in my brain and my hemorrhages and my cortex, and it was so intense that if I hit my head again, I likely would have very severe consequences. And I
Right.
knew as a professional athlete, you fall a lot. So that's something that really helped me was in my initial stages of recovery. I was used to being a failure. I was used to not being able to walk upstairs. I was used to falling over and over again and getting back up and keep going. So that helped. But then, since I knew that that would continue and I would fall a lot relearning all my tricks, because not only did I have to relearn how to ski, I had to relearn every single one of my tricks. And it was easier than the first time. So, like everything that I had to relearn with my brain injury, it was just like the rust fell off of me. So, it was easier
Mm,
to get back than the first time I learned it. But I still had to relearn it. Like I had to relearn how to ride a two-wheel bicycle from a recumbent bike, which
mm,
is like a human tricycle. And so relearning how to ski and relearning all my tricks meant that I would put myself at risk and I would put the support at risk and I would put my family's love at risk. And that was super
mm,
jarring and scary. And I honestly didn't want to die in front of my mom after all the work that she was doing for me. And so I chose to step away from skiing. And when I stepped out of skiing is actually when I stepped into therapy because I actually didn't think I needed to go to therapy. I thought my life was really lucky. I was very fortunate to be alive. I should be really happy. I should be content. However, I was crying multiple times a day and really struggling with feeling like I had a lack of identity and I had no reason to do anything.
mm,
And so my mom, again, convinced me to go to therapy and said that one of the grant recipients that I got grants from this organization that they had already paid for me to go to therapy. So if I didn't go, I would be wasting their money, which is the way to get me to do something because I can't waste people's money
mm,
or waste people's time or things like that. So I went to therapy, cried the whole first session, and I went back to therapy and I went over and over again. And it's one of the things that definitely changed my life. And I continued going till I felt comfortable rebuilding my new identity. I actually also went back to university, which was very helpful for me in the sense that I had teachers that wanted to, they grade you. And I had a
mm,
way to perform and I could get that competitive edge a venue. Like my first semester, I was taking a math class, and my first exam in it, I got a C minus. And by the end of it, I had gone to enough extra training and extracurricular activities that by the end, I actually had such a high grade that I was the bar that the rest of the grades were set at. And I finished that semester with an A in that class because I had some place to put all that energy
yeah.
and accomplish things again. So that was very, very helpful for me to have a structure to be
Mm.
able to perform again.
Was it cognitive therapy, speech therapy, or outpatient therapy, or was it just the normal kind of standard therapy?
Well, so I went after I left the hospital, I went to outpatient therapy in speech, occupational, and physical
Yeah.
therapy. And
Mhm.
I was very fortunate because Utah has a traumatic brain injury fund from the
No
federal
way.
government. Mhm.
Wow.
And every state does not have this. And it's something that we actually went to Washington, D.C. this March of 2024, my sister and I, for advocacy. We had 14 different meetings with 5 different states about reauthorizing the Traumatic Brain Injury Act, which is started in 1996. Anyways, we could go on about that because we do a lot of bipartisan policy work because
Mm,
we believe that we need to change the narrative for brain injury and the opportunities for millions that are affected by it. And so, back to what I was saying, we had a I had the fund. So I went to 5 days a week outpatient therapy for 3 hours, and I continued past when my private insurance would have cut me off and gave a cap because of the rehabilitation fund in the state of Utah that paid for my continual rehabilitation because I was prescribed by the doctors to have this
mm,
rehabilitation. But most people, their private insurance or their family's private insurance cuts them off and they're left with disabilities that they could heal if given the opportunities to keep the rehabilitation process going. So
mm,
when I started rehabilitation, the right side of my body didn't work. I couldn't drive a car. My license had been taken away. I couldn't make decisions as I was over 18. I was 22, but I couldn't make decisions as an adult because that had been taken away. Something that's interesting though was during this time when I was not allowed to drive a car, I could have gone to Walmart and bought a gun. And
Wow.
that's terrifying. And it's not a question of whether people should be safe gun owners or not. It's a question of whether we should have policy in place so individuals, even though I had no criminal record, which is what they look for, I had no
Yeah.
criminal record. But because of how severely I had a brain injury, I should not have been able to buy a gun at that time because 1 in 3 individuals who had a traumatic brain injury will attempt to commit suicide, and 90%
Really?
of those who do it with a gun will be successful.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So, like I said, it's bipartisan. We're working with the Republican and Democratic Party on all these things. And it's not a question of whether anybody should ever have guns or not guns. It's just the
Yeah.
safety of the individual and
Yeah.
the
Protecting them from
society.
themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, how do you think someone's TBI should be assessed to see if they should legally even be able to buy a gun, drive a car, do all these things that an adult will have the freedom to do? But if you have a TBI and you can't even decide for yourself, how do you think the person should be assessed or their injury should be assessed?
That's a good question. And it's a very complicated question. So, whether you think it is enough or not enough, I think for your ability to buy a gun, it should be related to your ability to make other decisions legally. So I am not fully aware of how I know how they diagnose, but it's complicated. But if they can
Yeah.
say that you can't drive a car, you also should have a protocol in place. And even every trauma center should talk with the family members about safekeeping of their guns and things like
Mm,
that. And right now it's just such a controversial subject. Guns politically are just so controversial on either side
sure.
that people don't have the talk about how to make it safer for these individuals.
Now, another thing I'm curious about is, of course, you can lose all your memory or lose temporary access to it. But you mentioned before you had to relearn how to ski, relearn how to drive, all those kind of things. Did you do you think muscle memory stays in the muscles or stays in the brain? And how is muscle memory? Do you lose access to muscle memory when you have a TBI in your case?
Well, they say that muscle memory is a form of memory for specific motor tasks that is taught through repetition, which is in your brain. And
Gotcha.
so that's why I was describing how when I relearned something, it was like the rust was falling off me because,
Hmm.
in a sense, when you have a brain injury, it's like a giant snowstorm to your brain. So it
Yeah.
closes all your brain pathways, and there's no fancy plows to open the pathways. You have to reopen them or build new synaptic connections and new brain pathways, which we know is possible. We used to think that neuroplasticity only happened in the cortical stages of development or first 2 years post accident, which is why everything is set up for that. The
Hmm.
rehabilitation, the understanding is all set up that whatever you have, I said it's 2 years post will be for the rest of your life, which is not the case. And we have had some peer reviewed education in the sciences that show that you can continue to heal and your brain actually has neuroplasticity at any time in its life. However, that neuroplasticity is built from repetition. So you have to
Hmm.
walk the paths enough to rebuild them. So that's like with the muscle memory is like rebuilding some of those paths, or you have to create new paths to get to the end destination. And that takes even longer time. So for me
Mm,
personally, I would say it probably took a good 6 years to actually have a full recovery from my brain injury. And during that time and during all the process, I thought I was much farther along than I actually was looking back at it. So I'll
same.
have people who met me like 3 years post accident and met me again 5 years post accident, and they're like, "Wow, like it just seems like the words are just easier for you. I don't really know how to explain it, but
Uh,
you seem different." And so
mm,
that's what I would hear a lot. Now, people, if they've met me like 5 years or they meet me now, the way I have evolved is kind of just how any individual would evolve, like growing up and, learning things and developing
uh,
situations and stuff. But it's not like as clear as like directly related to my brain injury. However, like I said, and I had some pauses, it's very confusing to everybody, myself and the other individuals that see the differences that I've made. They don't know how to explain the last couple of years of recovery,
mm.
the changes that I had. It's very complicated. But it's like
Now,
executive function.
huh, that's really interesting. Now, when I always talk about TBIs to someone that doesn't understand it, I'll always compare them to fingerprints. I'll say, yeah, each TBI is completely unique, like a fingerprint is, because that's just something that people understand already. Um, you've dove into TBIs a lot more in depth than I have with your fund, with what you're doing, and I think that's amazing. The next question I'm going to ask you is about the uniqueness and all the different kinds of TBIs and all the different effects. Because I mean, you and I had a very similar effect with walking and talking. The other woman I met, it was the same thing, but it was she forgot who her family was. A guy I met at an event in Vegas last week. He had a brain tumor, had to have it taken out. It was the size of a golf ball. He had 64 stitches on his neck to get that out, and he forgot how to walk and talk as well. So it's I don't know if it's like we're naturally just finding each other, just the way the universe works, or that's a common kind of TBI, or is it just the TBI that's the most extreme that the person needs to confront it and recover from it? So, what range of TBIs have you seen from different levels of severity?
Well, I have been very involved in the brain injury world, as you say. And so I have seen all different levels. And from con- a, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. And I've seen people who have prolonged difficulty and prolonged deficits from concussion to as critical as mine. Mine was just about the most critical brain injury that people could have, and all in between. And like you pointed out, every recovery is different and it is like a fingerprint. However, at the same time, fingerprints have the similarity that they're all a fingerprint. And so we do so much talking about how varied brain injury are that we forget about the commonalities that they do all have. And while one form of brain injury, you might not have to relearn how to walk exactly. There are ways to recover that positively affect everybody who had a brain injury. So, the nutrition, the food that you're eating makes a difference. The
Hmm,
activity that you're doing, your nature therapy, you're listening to music, your ability to find ways to perform again. So everybody has different levels of performance. They weren't me prior to my brain injury, they're not going to be me post my brain injury. May have different levels of recovery, but finding an art class to do, finding a pottery class, finding a yoga class, finding these activities has been proven over and over again that it helps individuals who've had brain injuries. And so there are common threads that help everybody.
hmm,
And then one of the other kind of common threads is that especially people over 50 who have had a stereotypically successful recovery do not stay connected to brain injury. And so like I mentioned, there are millions of people who are hospitalized every year for traumatic brain injury. However, many of them we don't know exist. So we don't hear about the person who I know and wants to remain anonymous, who is a top level executive at a high corporation and had a coma 25 years ago. We don't know. No one in his organization knows that he had that coma. Nobody knows. He told me because I had the brain injury and I'm so open about it. Or like there's a top policymaker, same thing. And what I hear from them is they're not interested in sharing because there's a huge stigma tied to brain injury. So you only hear the stories of people saying, well, here's my problems. I'm 25 years down the road, but I still have XYZ as a problem because this is a chronic challenge and I'm never going to recover. And I feel very passionate and interested about that because on the one side, I do firmly believe we need much more rehabilitation for a longer period of time. And having something be a chronic challenge does allow that to happen. Like I know personally, I had such an extensive amount of rehabilitation compared to the average individual, and that helped me out tremendously. And so we need to do that. But at the same time, if we think and we create our lives that we're definitely never going to be able to be happy again, it's a sentence to disability for life, and we kind of got fucked over, and that sucks for us. But you know, we have to figure out how to accept all of our challenges and live with them. Then we're going to be miserable forever. And so that's not really that cool. And so, like I mentioned, I'm not saying that I can guarantee you that you will have the recovery that I did. But we also can't guarantee you that you will not have the recovery that I did. And I can guarantee you that if you actually take action and you take steps, you will have a better recovery than if you do nothing.
Now, I know we're running over here, so I have one last question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. What is one thing that you going back, looking at all your experience from skiing to recovering from your TBI to being a professional speaker and growing your speaking business, what is one piece of knowledge that you would share with an aspiring speaker, a professional speaker, or an entrepreneur that speaks through other business?
I would say for everybody, myself included, I would say there's going to be struggles. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be days that you feel so stuck and you're so frustrated and you don't see any improvement. And it's hard. And it's really hard. And those days are so frustrating. And let yourself be frustrated. Let yourself feel those emotions. Let yourself cry, do things like let yourself embrace that, and then use that to motivate you to keep going and be open to changing. Like, so be open and creative. Like I mentioned with the brain injury, you might not be able to have, actually pretty much nobody has exactly the same life that they had previously. And so maybe you can return to skiing. However, it's going to be different. So create benefits, like use every situation that you have to create your luck, to create the best outcome you can. And shitty things happen. And sometimes they're permanent. Like I lost my older sister to cancer 2 years ago, and it sucked. I still have lots of challenges dealing with that. I went back to therapy. I still am in therapy for that again. And it's really hard. And so things aren't fair. Life's just not fair. But if you are alive, no matter what happened to you, you can take what happened to you and turn that into having the most luck. Take the tragedy, turn it into a triumph, all those sayings, if you keep walking the path. So let yourself have moments where you're upset, but just keep going. because you're gonna fall and you have to just keep going.
So let's say I'm listening here and I've gotten so much value from what you've said, whether it be about TBIs, speaking, skiing, whatever it is. Where can I find you on the internet?
Well, our website is www.mocrazystrong.org. MoCrazy is MoCrazy, strong, STRONG. And you can get involved with a nonprofit foundation. We educate people and raise the opportunities of brain injury survivors through education and awareness and programs. And you can find me on social media on Instagram at Jamie, JAMIE, MoCrazy, MoCrazy. And those are kind of the two biggest venues. We also have a YouTube channel, MoCrazy Strong. And on that channel, we have some videos that we made with the Brain Injury Alliance of Utah, specifically for family caregivers, because that's a whole nother thing that we didn't touch on in this conversation was the other family members who all of a sudden are thrust into the role and have had no educational background usually. So we offer MoCrazy method on our website. You can log into that, and that is kind of a boot camp taught by my mom because she has a PhD in mind body medicine. She's working on it to put science behind everything that she did with me that she had already learned from her early childhood brain development education. And it's a boot camp because let me tell you, when I was in the hospital and my right side wasn't working and she would tape down my strong hand and make me utilize my weak hand when I couldn't hold water without it spilling, that fucking sucked. I was so embarrassed. I hated it. I even told my mom, I was like, I really hate you right now. I was so upset because it was so hard to do. So everything that you do in your recovery is not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. However, if you do these things, you will see outcomes that far exceed your expectations.
Boom. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for listening. If you've got a friend that's an aspiring speaker, professional speaker, or an entrepreneur, maybe someone that's a corporate speaker, and you think Jamie would be a good fit, you guys know where to find her. And Jamie, thank you for taking the time to make this appearance today. Cheers, y'all.